I'd like to introduce our special guest now. Frank Giustra has recently become a very public figure, which is ironic since he's always been someone who has shied away from the spotlight. But as I think everyone would agree, he has taken on this well-deserved attention. Frank hails from Sudbury, where his father worked at Inco as a driller. It was his father who got him interested in the stock market. Frank spent 20 years in the brokerage business working for Merrill Lynch and later Yorkton Securities, which he helped turn into a major force in the world of international mining finance. When he left York, he moved to a film business, Frank, as chair and CEO. He developed his movie business, Lionsgate Entertainment, into one of the world's largest independent film companies in the world, and then sold the firm and returned to the world of investments. Frank is now chair of a merchant banking firm, Endeavour Financial, which is a giant in financial investment. He's applied his Midas touch everywhere he goes, but always has been very private about his success until a few years ago. I understand that it was during a fundraiser, as I learned at his home, for the tsunami relief in 2004 that this very private man became close to one of the greatest extroverts of our time, former U.S. President Bill Clinton. The rest, as they say, is history. This past June, Frank and Bill Clinton launched the Clinton-Giustra Sustainable Growth Initiative to address global poverty. Frank committed $100 million to this effort, plus half of whatever he makes in the rest of his lifetime. Frank, we have a lot of MBA students here in the audience today. I'm sure they're trying to calculate what that number might look like. Seriously, Frank convinced 20 other companies in the mining and resource sector to join him as well, and we thank many of them for being with us here today and supporting this lunch. It's truly an exciting venture and an awe-inspiring commitment, and the momentum is growing. Despite all this momentum, it's clear that Frank is still happier in the background, but because of his commitment to philanthropy and the Clinton-Giustra initiative, he agreed to be here with us this afternoon. So as I turn things over to Canadian Club Vice President and BNN TV anchor, Amanda Lang, please join me in welcoming the chair of Endeavour Financial and one of the world's most private leaders, that is until now, Frank Giustra.
Alan and Verity both mentioned there are cards on your tables, and I'm here really just to fill the time until we get your questions. We're most interested in what you want to know from and about Frank, but because I can hog the floor for now, I will do that. And Frank, it's great to have you here. Alan referred to the fact that you get into investment banking and you help create Canada's role in that world when it comes to resources. You get into the film industry, you create a great global leader in films. It does leave one wondering what your vision is now. You're not just giving $100 million. What's the point? What do you want to see happen here?
I think that's a very good question. I think the $100 million really gets lost. We get lost in the idea of that $100 million, but I think this is a much bigger movement than my initial commitment. What was more important about it was that I was able to bring together an entire business sector towards a common goal to, and in this case, to alleviating poverty around the world. And the fact that was doable because mining operates in almost every developing country in the world. So you had a natural fit. There was a general desire by the mining industry to be involved in social and economic development. But it's been very difficult for individual companies to undertake those types of programs because there are a lot of things that need to be done in advance to have sustainable economic development. And this is where the Clinton Foundation came in as the implementing partner in all of this. So it was really a marriage of a tremendously large business sector that operates all over the world, that has the desire to do these things, and an organization that can actually implement. And the idea was to bring them together, and it's to President Clinton's credit, he understood it right away. And he encouraged me to undertake this, and so that's what I've been doing the last 7 months.
$100 million is a great deal of money. And I think I've personally thanked you before for doing it. I think any of us would feel grateful that somebody who has $100 million uses it in this way. What you're talking about, though, might take a lot more than $100 million over time. I know you're continuing your financial commitment. Who else do you need on board? What else do you need to achieve your vision?
Well, certainly I think that this initiative over the years will deploy billions of dollars. I really believe that. I think that that sort of capacity is out there, the need is out there, and I certainly believe that those monies exist not only within the mining industry, and obviously the mining industry has been the first pool of capital that I've gone after since I'm familiar with them, but there are many other pools of capital that are available for this, so I think that this will run into the billions, and it will need it in due course.
We, as Canadians, beware sentences that start "we as Canadians," but we do have a different culture around giving than, say, the Americans. We tend to, maybe because we tend to be socialist by nature, we believe governments should step in. Do you see that changing?
Well, I think there is a growing trend, most definitely, and it's worldwide, where the private sector is getting into areas that were traditionally areas that government and government agencies filled. And I think that you're seeing this growing trend, which I quite like, with the corporate sector and private philanthropists, where they're applying not only their pool of resources, but also their business skills and disciplines towards solving some of the world's most critical issues. And I think that that is a plus. And that, to me, that's a tremendous target audience, and this is where I'm going to focus a lot of my attention in the next while, and is targeting that audience.
So talk about the message that you would bring to other wealthy individuals, corporations, whomever it is that you want to reach about why this is important. What's the long-term reason why a Canadian-based company should think about sustainable growth in Brazil or Panama or anywhere else?
Well, if you've watched what's happened over the last 20, 30 years, there's been some great fortunes created as a result of things like globalization, emerging markets, this commodities boom, and just generally an environment of cheap money. And there has been a concentration of wealth like we've never seen before in history. So that wealth is held in very few hands. And I think that it's incumbent upon those people, those custodians of wealth, to start to think about what they're going to do with that money. I look at it as an opportunity. I think, there are, if you take the U.S., in the U.S. alone, you've got 900 billionaires. 900. And I don't know if you've ever sat down and, for fun, tried to spend $1 billion in your mind. It's impossible. And I've done it. You sit down on a piece of paper and do this.
You could, though.
No, I couldn't. I tried. I sat down and I thought, everything you could possibly want: a mansion, a second home, third home, fourth home, a plane, a yacht, expensive art on your walls, jewelry. I guarantee you'll finish that list and the bulk of that billion will still be there. And that, to me, is surplus capital, and it has no other purpose other than to create additional wealth. So to me, it's an illusion to have that money if you're not going to use it for anything purposeful. And so why not take that money, and this is what I try and preach to people, why not take that money that is otherwise useless and use it to invest in things like health and education and raising the incomes of those less fortunate, and provide true dividends for your children and your grandchildren. You look at these 900 billionaires. There was a study done, and the bulk of them are still leaving most of their fortunes to their children. 9% goes to charity. 2% goes to their pets. And so I think, to me, that's a great, I call these guys enlightened capitalists in waiting. And I think that they're a great audience to talk to, because what I found in my travels as I've had conversations with these very wealthy entrepreneurs is that they will open their minds to opening their wallets if you can convince them that their money won't go into a black hole. If you can convince them that they use their own business discipline or entrust their money to an organization that has certain business disciplines, such as looking for results, using metrics, that they're open to turning their attention towards philanthropy. It's funny, most wealthy entrepreneurs continue to create wealth as a matter of sport, not as a means of security. So to those, philanthropy can be the great new motivator that allows them to do what it is they love to do, make money, but where the fruits of their labors goes towards something useful.
one of the people involved in this, and it seems to me somebody who's changed your life, is Bill Clinton. And it's been alluded to here. People who've watched your history know you don't talk about yourself much. You don't get up on stage with pesky reporters very often. So obviously this is a deeper kind of, why do you feel like you need to be visible and vocal, as well as just quietly giving?
Well, you know, I gave this a lot of thought before we launched this thing, and for the longest time I really was reluctant to become public, and I really wrestled with this a lot. I did prefer being private for a lot of reasons, but I had to come to the conclusion that this needed a spokesman. I mean, you can't just launch something like this and just let it, you know, it's not going to grow on its own, and I will have to foster the ongoing lobbying and participation of the mining industry and all the other industries that support the mining industry, and put the pieces together that are be necessary to allow the Clinton Foundation to implement. And I had to. I just had no choice, and here I am.
How much of this kind of, this particular vision, the Clinton Giustra Sustainable Growth Initiative, came from Clinton, and how much of it came from Giustra?
Well, I'll give him the credit for opening my eyes to a number of things. Well, first of all, his work ethic and his dedication towards the areas that are of interest to him, you know, solving some of the world's most critical issues. And he did truly inspire me to think more about philanthropy than I had been thinking already. So, and then watching how he managed to involve the private sector, which is ultimately very important. If you want anything that's, if you're going to implement some sort of a program that's going to be sustainable, it has to have value. There has to be a value proposition for the private sector in order for it to be sustainable. And I think that that's the key that he saw. And as I watched him operate and work with the private sector to address other critical issues such as climate change, the HIV/AIDS problem, one day it just gelled that there was a great opportunity. Here I was influential with an industry, the mining industry, that was global. And here was an organization and a person that had the ability to implement. So that's how it all came about. And I approached him and I said, you know, if I can tap into the mining industry for the resources, will you put together an organization to implement these programs? And he got it, to his credit, right away. He backed me right away, and that was the beginning of it all.
This is a good question, because I know that anybody who's not in Denver in the mining business is in this room. How do you address the seemingly contradictory actions of mining with sustainability?
Well, I think that it's definitely a perception problem. I must say that the mining industry does not get credit to a large extent for the work that they have done, and it's been this ongoing communications problem that I think they have for the most part. And I'm not talking about all mining companies, but I'm talking about the senior mining companies that are acting in a very responsible manner and are up against a number of NGOs on a continuous basis and trying to get their point across in a combative mode with NGOs. And I think that if there's a way, if someone can find a way, and it's one of the things we're looking at, but if someone can find a way to have a third party properly communicate to the communities in which these mining companies work the type of work that they're doing in the environmental field, I think it will go a long way to removing this air of mistrust. And at that point, then you can sit down and have a conversation about social economic development without there being some view that there's another agenda there. And I think that that's going to be one of the big challenges.
This one's almost a follow-on, but maybe it's part of the way you make a pitch. The question is, has sustainable development become a cost of doing business versus what it used to be, a reputation builder?
I think that both on moral grounds and business grounds, it's where the world is heading. I mean, it used to be okay just to deal with the simple notion of corporate social responsibility, which was focused on primarily providing assistance. You know, building a school, building a hospital, building a church. And while all those things are good and they're still needed, I think what firms are starting to recognize is that a different approach is needed, one that is scalable, sustainable, and creates systemic change. And that's where I think we, through the Clinton Foundation, have the skills to create that systemic change.
Maybe this will help you answer that, because I'm curious to know what you mean by that. The demand for relief will certainly exceed the funds available. How will you prioritize how you use the funds?
Well, first of all, we're doing this in a very methodical way. We're going country by country, and we're very likely to launch our first initiatives in Colombia and Peru this year. And we've targeted other countries that, we will get into in 2008. Listen, we're not here. We're not going to solve the entire world's problems, but we certainly can go a long way to creating a model. First of all, to tapping into the mining industry and the resource industry, and implement these programs in the developing world. More importantly, I think we're creating a model that can be used by all business sectors, such that any business sector that operates on a global scale can incorporate this model into their operating systems. And that's really, for us, the big opportunity. And if we achieve that, then I think we can go a long way to alleviating poverty on a larger scale.
This is the question, why is this good for Canada or the U.S. that corporate philanthropy leaves the continent?
Well, I think, first of all, there's a tremendous need outside of North America. But I think there's also this, and when I was talking earlier about this growing trend of this concentration of wealth that's taking place at the expense, certainly not having addressed the issues of health and education and raising income levels where they're needed. And I think that perception of inequality is creating resentment. And it's resentment that's fostering in many cultures, and it's aimed at the West. And I think that it's incumbent upon us, whether it's the private sector or philanthropists, to come together and use that concentration of wealth to remedy that problem. I think it's important because some of that, by the way, some of that resentment manifests itself in terrorism. And I think that's the root of all the problems in the world are based on economic conditions.
Am I right in thinking that your focus, the Clinton Giustra Foundation focus, is more south than east?
No, we're starting in Latin America for a number of reasons that made it very convenient for us and will allow us to demonstrate some early success. But we're definitely moving into Africa. We've already identified 3 African countries that we will start to study early in 2008, working with other groups that are providing the capital. And eventually I hope that this will also take us into Southeast Asia, Central Europe, Central Asia. There are a lot of places we want to go, but I think we have to first show that we can put a program into place and achieve results.
This is a question that may be technical, it's certainly over my head, but why is it that the IMF has such high interest rates? And if you don't want to answer that, you can answer it in the context of there are these great and venerable institutions at work now in the world. Will you work with them? Do you need to work with them?
I'm not sure that we need to work with institutions at the level of the IMF, but we are looking to work with other NGOs that are already doing good work in some of these countries, but where we can take their work and scale their efforts and make them sustainable. That's really our goal, is to really create an environment that all the existing players can just get more out of it. Perhaps there's an opportunity to work with the IMF, but I don't think we're working from a bottom-up approach, which is a much different strategy than has been used by organizations like the IMF.
Where would local governments fit into the picture for you in terms of creating sustainable systems that you leave behind?
Well, first of all, there are levels of government. We have to work with all of them. We have to work with the federal governments in these countries, with the local and regional governments, and we've already started to have conversations at those levels. And I think one of the bigger areas that we've identified in some of these countries is that we need to build capacity at the local and regional level to train these people such that they can conceptualize and develop and implement these programs, because that capacity is not there. And it's great to have the pool of capital available, but if there's no capacity to be able to implement that, it sits there. And there are large sums of money sitting specifically dedicated to social and economic development that are not being spent because there isn't the capacity to do it at the local level.
What keeps you up at night about this? What do you fear for this initiative?
Well, ultimately, that we have to succeed. I mean, it's like anything. When you're launching a new business, anybody that's launched a new business, when I launched Lionsgate, it used to keep me up at nights. You know, will we succeed? It used to keep me up a lot at nights. It's like everything else. You just want to make sure that you have put the right people into place, that you've studied the situation sufficiently, and that when you implement, that you're going to get measurable results that you can show the rest of the world, and then continue and allow the program to continue. That's my biggest angst, is that we get results.
Canadians are known for helping people around the world. What are your thoughts personally and as Canadians about what we should do about the third world in first world Canada, that is Canadian Aboriginals?
Well, I think that, you know, obviously we talk a lot about taking this program outside of Canada and outside of North America, but we certainly have similar issues in parts of this country. And I've had conversations with a number of major mining companies that are based here in Canada that have addressed this. And I think that there's no reason whatsoever why we can't apply the same models that we're developing elsewhere here in Canada. They're just as needed here as anywhere else. And I think the mining companies we've spoken to are certainly receptive to that.
In terms of acting as a leader, showing others that this is possible, what kind of response have you had from some of your peers here and around the world?
Actually, it's been really good. I was quite surprised that when I went out, I started this last February, I started lobbying the industry and running around seeing heads of mining companies and heads of brokerage firms. My good friend G. McBurney here, who's been tremendously supportive. At first, there were a lot of questions. I mean, you know, I was coming forward with a fairly large plan in an area that people were always suspect of, you know, providing aid to the developing world. And it took many conversations, and it took a lot of meetings with President Clinton. And finally, they started to fall into place. And I found that once the momentum started, everybody wanted to be in it, such that when we launched it in June, I had lots of unsolicited calls from a number of major mining companies and other players that want to find some way to get involved. And now we're going through the process of having these conversations with these folks and trying to figure out when we're going to get to their country of interest. Yeah, they've been very supportive. And I think that there's much more enthusiasm from the mining industry than they get credit for. They really have a vision about investing funds intelligently and to create sustainable economic development that will be there long after the mine is closed.
The mining industry has a long history of sustainable development close to the mine. Is it a sell to say, think broader, take this bigger picture than just your own workers and their families?
It hasn't been difficult, no. They recognize that, you know, poverty, levels of poverty exist not only in mining communities but throughout the country. So what we have to do is find that balance, which we're doing now in a couple of these countries, find the balance where we will deploy the funds with our various partners and various partner organizations to all areas where they're needed, not just in the mining communities.
This is a question from a student pointing out that the vast majority of Canadians live their lives earning $30,000 to $40,000. As a multimillionaire, I think he's a billionaire actually, why not donate more like 95% of your income, since that would still allow you to live comfortably?
It's a great question. You know, and I'm glad actually you raised that, because if I were a billionaire, which I'm not, if I were, I would have given a heck of a lot more than $100 million. It just, you know, I've decided that $100 million plus half of everything I make is a substantial commitment for me, and I hope that half part ends up being a lot of money.
How do you intend to sustain communities? Can you give examples? And again, this comes back to Aboriginal Canadians, but do you have specific examples yet? Are you still working on what you mean by that?
We're still working on it, but as I said, there are examples of how you can. First of all, there are two things you need to do. First, you have to address the core social needs of a community before you can have any sustainable economic development. And that means you have to have health and education, clean water, nutrition. If those basic elements are not in place, then the rest of it is redundant. But once that is in place, then the idea is to foster entrepreneurship, to bring in ideas as to how to best use what that community can produce, services or goods, and reduce their input costs through various means that we've developed in other countries, organize their external markets, make sure that the product that they're creating is reliable and scalable such that it will satisfy and comfort the external buyers. So it's really about creating business opportunities and job creation opportunities in these countries once we've addressed the core issues.
I don't know, maybe we need Eric Nonax on this one, but was the Clinton administration pro or anti-mining? They're taking the fifth. How would you define that from a government point of view? Are there policies globally that create better environments for mining companies? Not really.
Well, it's country by country. Every country has different legislation, different levels of bureaucracy, different levels of corruption that you have to deal with. But there is no global policy on mining. It's country by country. And but I think there is a trend towards environmentally sound practices by mining companies, and that's everywhere. I don't think you can escape that in the world today. And I think most companies are very much on that. This area of social and economic development is newer. There have been some attempts by a number of mining companies to implement these sort of things, but it's difficult on a unilateral basis to try and implement a program that requires the cooperation of a number of different actors.
This is from a U of T student, maybe an MBA student, saying today's mining leaders, at least many of them, are close to retiring. How do you engage the next generation?
Well, I think that certainly, as I understand it, a lot of the universities now in mining have courses on corporate social responsibility, environmental standards. Is becoming a very important part of the curriculum, and I think that that's great because it's this new generation, this new younger generation that is really much more focused on change than say the older generation was. I've noticed that just on a personal basis.
In a general way, there was in time gone by a kind of an ethic, an ethos around tithing or personal giving in support of those less fortunate. Have we moved away from that? Do you see us shifting back to more private donors, or are we still expecting somebody else to do it?
Well, you know, it's interesting. You know, I always look at the motives behind philanthropy, and I think I don't care if it's because you have the heart of Mother Teresa, or it's driven by the guilt that you have the money in the first place, or you like your name on a building, or it's mandated by your religious beliefs, or it's just good business practice. It doesn't matter. It's just do it. Everybody's money is good, and everybody's input is good. And philanthropy is based on behavior, not motive. So I think that, to me, I'll talk to anybody that is willing to open their wallets.
In terms of running this organization, how much of your time personally is going to be devoted to it?
Eric, what do you think? Most of it. Looks like most of it these days. It really does. This is a daunting job. It has a lot of moving pieces and a lot of things that still have to be implemented. We've just begun. It's taking 90% of my time.
And when you think about how big a staff it will need?
I don't know. It depends how many countries. I think every country will have a country director. There will be staff underneath. There will be volunteers, many volunteers. There will be people in our Vancouver office and people staffed at the Clinton offices in New York working together. And I don't know, numbers, hundreds, I don't know.
Presumably there are organizations you can partner with. We've got Nigel here from UNICEF. There are others out there. Is that going to be a natural way to kind of spread yourselves?
Absolutely. Again, I'll say it again. It's not our job to reinvent what other people are doing in these countries already. And some very fine organizations doing great work. What we want to do is scale their efforts and make them sustainable. And that requires certain skills that I'm happy to say that President Clinton possesses. And it's to bring everybody together in one cohesive plan to tackle a specific problem. And so we don't want to duplicate what's already been done.
I'm curious to know whether, from your point of view, going through this process, which, as you say, is a daunting one, whether there's something that the Canadian government could do, does do. Are they a help to you? Should they be doing something to make it easier?
Well, you know what's really pleasant are the Canadian embassies. They've been so wonderful. We've been to a couple of countries already where they go out of their way to help us and make sure that we succeed. They've been just a dream to work with. And they do have a budget. It's small, but all the Canadian embassies in these countries have budgets for this sort of thing. And they're assisting us in the couple of countries we've been in already. They've assisted us in, just whatever help we need. They've been just great.
And in terms of how long you anticipate Frank Giustra will be devoted to this, is it the rest of your life? You're still a young man.
Relatively. I just turned 50. So, yeah, I think for the rest of my life, I certainly have made that commitment. So, I have to live by it now.
And you are married. Was it a family decision?
It's interesting. It started off as a family decision, and then I sort of went on and did this. I certainly talked to my children, who are very young. I've got a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old, and we continuously remind them about what their responsibility is as people that have all the comforts and privilege that they have, and that it's their job to, as they grow up, to find ways to give back. So it's just reinforcing that over and over again.
And no kind of pushback from anybody in your life or your world who said, $100 million, give 10 and it'll still be a lot of money?
No, I think I shocked a few people with 100, but I don't think anybody's telling me that I did something that I shouldn't have done. I raised a few eyebrows, but no. More importantly, I'm comfortable with it. I don't care. It's my money. I can give it away.
We are just about out of time. I do want to ask you when we'll be talking about the measurable results. How long before we see communities that are beneficiaries of this?
I think, again, we're hoping to implement starting this calendar year. And again, depending on which metrics you're looking at, I'm thinking well into next year before we can say, okay, listen, here's what we've done, and here has been the result of this clean water program or this nutrition program throughout this country. And the economic benefits, those of creating economic activity, I think will be a little bit further down the road, but we're on it right away, and we really want to get started right away. Give us a year. Call me back in a year.
Well, I think I can speak on behalf of many, if not all, when I thank you for not just being here, but for being so generous, and not just with the money itself, but in the example that you set. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Amanda. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Frank and Amanda, and thanks to all of you for joining us here today for this exclusive interview with someone who has made such a grand gesture and one with such power behind it. In preparing my remarks for today, I learned that Frank, like his friend Bill Clinton, is a great reader. He also collects first edition books, and I believe that one of his prized books is an autobiography of Mahatma Gandhi. I think Frank and former President Clinton would agree with these words of Mahatma. If you want to change the world, be that change. Change is the only constant. We see this daily in the world around us, and we often feel overwhelmed and powerless to help. But then we find examples of people who have the will and the ability to make a difference, and their work makes us believe that we do have the power to transform and make the world a better place for all of us. It seems appropriate to end my remarks with a quote from the co-founder of the Clinton-Giustra Sustainable Growth Initiative, Bill Clinton, who, reflecting on life in his new book, says, "Much of modern culture is characterized by self-indulgence and self-destruction. Much of modern politics is focused not on honest differences of policy, but on personal attacks. Much of modern media is dominated by people who earn fortunes demeaning others. So who's happier, the uniters or the dividers, the builders or the breakers, the givers or the takers? I think we all know the answer to these questions. Frank, it was terrific to have a builder and a giver with us here today. Thank you so much for your time and for your inspiring visit.
Allison, thank you. And to all of you, thank you for coming this afternoon. Have a great afternoon, and we look forward to seeing you at the next Canadian Club event.